I'm Lars. Welcome back to the C# workshop. This video I will cover reading configuration files from an app settings JSON file. I will show you how to do this in a program.cs file so it can be used in a console app or a web service along with dependency injection. So let's get to it. Every application needs the ability to adjust parameters without rebuilding the application. Today this is accomplished via putting config sections in an app settings config JSON file. Now we don't have one here for the launcher, so let me add one in. We're going to say add, say new item. Now when you look through here, you're going to see assembly information file, you're going to see application manifest, application configuration file. I don't know why, but they have not placed one in here specifically saying app settings, but that's what everybody uses. Now, there is a JSON file, a JavaScript JSON configuration file. So we're going to name this app settings, all lowercase, and you're going to add it. This has become a standard. So this is a pure JSON file. And what we're looking to do in here is we're looking to put in something that looks a little like this. Just put a comma after exclude, and then JSON is built by using quotes around everything. So this is the folder config. And after you're going to put a colon in, and after the colon, you're going to put a curly brace. Okay, we're just going to call it a grouping for this folder config. Inside of this, we're going to have folder config settings. And there's going to be an array of them because these are folders. I want to be able to put in multiple folders in this grouping. I don't want to have a listing for my data directory and a listing for my output directory and everything else. So I just want an array of them. And each item that we're going to put in that array has got to get curly braces around it. The nice thing about JSON, and it's similar to XML where you need to put something in here like name, but they're not XML tags or HTML tags that wrap around. You just give it a name. So this would be a name value pair for what we're doing. And we're not going to use it as a name value pair, but you'll get the idea. And then the next thing is going to be the path. And my path is going to look like this. So you can just paste it in, highlight it, paste it in. You'll get all your double whacks. You cannot put an at symbol in front of it. It's not going to work. But this is the directory where this directory is going to exist. Okay, if that makes sense. So there'll be, if you look into here, configuration and DI, we're going to put a directory in here that's going to say data directory. So it's at that level. All right. Now we need a way to read this out of this app settings JSON. In order to read this out of this app settings JSON, we need some place to put that. We need a class to put it into. And in order to make this class, we also need to have an interface to interface with the configuration system that's built into .NET. The class and interface are tightly coupled that they are never used anyplace but here. And this is the one time that placing them in a single file makes sense. I found the best way to do this is to place all configurations for the app settings JSON file in another project. And I named that project configuration. So I can include this library in any project that I need. And this is going to be a class library. Projects are typically named by the company, so TDC, Thurman Design Company, and then you're going to have your project, which this is Lars C# Workshop, and then you're going to have a project area. Now I consider this an application programming interface because you're interfacing with not only the configuration in .NET, but you're also interfacing with the app settings JSON file, and this can be used anywhere. And then the actual name of the project, which should be around what it actually does. So I pick configuration. And this is going to drop this right over here in this directory, right next to everything. So we're going to use .NET 9.0. And we end up with this little file called class. If you hit F2, you can rename it. And this is going to be FolderConfig.cs. And yes, I want to rename the class also. All right, now that we have the class, we're going to put the interface in here. And that's nothing hard, it's just saying interface.
IFolderConfig. So all the configurations are built pretty much the same. They have a config class, and that config class contains a class list for the config settings, which is a list of fields for each config setting. So let me just kind of whip this in here and I'll show you what this means. So we're going to create another class down here, and it's going to be named FolderConfig settings. Now, what's in the FolderConfig settings? Well, that's exactly what we have here. We have a name and a path, and that's all we need. So let's go back over here to FolderConfig, and we're going to put in here public string name get set, and we're going to have public string path get set. Now we can create a list that sits inside of FolderConfig. So here's your public list FolderConfig settings. We're going to name this FolderConfig settings, and it's going to have a get and a set. And this is what we need up in the FolderConfig. Now you cannot put public, private, protected, any of the access modifiers, but you can put this in and say this is what's needed. This is going to tell you non-nullable property, must contain nulls. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go up here, and you can either delete these or you can comment them out. And I don't know, I did not do that in Launcher yet, so we're going to do that there also. I don't like being told that my reference types need question marks after them. Upon pulling out the usings, you're also going to get this little error here that says you're missing a using, because I don't want it to just go find them themselves and not tell me what's here. When you're working with junior developers, to have them know that system holds console is extremely important. So the next thing we need, and this is for the configuration, in order for us to load this into memory inside a program. Okay, so there's some things we have to do still inside a program, and we need this load in order to load this out of the configuration. So I'm going to drop this down in here with public static folder. Here's the IConfiguration, what's going to come in. So this is going to ask you to generate something. Well, that's going to be a little bit of an issue because we don't need to generate anything. So this is where the configuration starts coming into play inside of here, inside of this project. So one thing that we need to add at this point is some dependencies. And in order to do that, we're going to right click on dependencies and go to manage Nuget projects. Going to go to browse, and I probably have these up here. Microsoft extensions configuration right here. Now this will load in everything that it needs. You're going to want to get the latest stable version. You're going to hit install. You're going to see a bunch of stuff come up here. And you're going to see Microsoft extensions configuration. The other one that you need is called hosting. So we're going to get rid of configuration, and you're going to bring extensions hosting in. And you're going to install that one. And that didn't take any time at all. Now back here in configuration, when you mouse over this, it'll say we need to set using extensions configuration. Hit save. You can hit Control Shift B, and that will build. This guy right here requires the extension hosting. Okay. So there's an IConfiguration section. What does this actually do? Now, I guess that's the big question. When we call into this, we're going to bring in the config. The config will be, think of it as a list of everything that is over here in app settings, plus some. There's going to be more. All right. So we're going to take this section, and we're going to say get folder config out of it. And that's it. And then we're just going to set our folder config. And it's going to decompile it, and it's going to deserialize it into folder config with folder config settings and everything else. There's a video out there on serialization, and it's dealing with serialization for JSON and XML, okay, and how you can use serialization. It's a very powerful tool. If it's not out there yet, it's the next video that's coming up. So like, subscribe, and click that bell if you want to, get that when it comes out. So everything's built. Right now, if we were to run this application, we would just get hello world. Okay, there's nothing else that's going to happen. This is where the magic comes in.
Hey, if you think there's too much information to remember, then like and subscribe to the channel. Then you'll have a URL that you can go back and look at anytime.
Now, in order to use the configuration, we're going to have to add this project to this project. All right, this class library's got to be added in. So you're not going to go and add it like this and say add. There's no way to add an existing item. But we have the dependencies just like we did up here for packages, except for we're just going to say add project reference. And that's going to pull that in. Now at that point, you're going to pull in the extensions configuration and the extensions hosting. I don't recommend being dependent on them, okay? Because you could always just delete this out of here. So I always recommend coming back to Manage Nuget Packages, go back to Browse, and if you've already searched for these in here, you're going to find them again. And I use them quite a bit, so they're always in my list. And you're going to get extensions, just like we did before. And then you're going to get hosting. You got to delete this off of here, like that. You're going to get hosting, boom, and you're going to install that in. Now, if I was to remove configuration, nothing would happen I wouldn't get all this, hey, what's going on stuff with my project. We can save everything. We don't need that. We don't need that. Configuration can stay there. And the last thing that we want to add here to the packages is Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. And we're going to get that one installed also. That'll be for later, but we might as well just get them all out of the way. All right, so we can close that down. Now, what I need to do here is we need to add in an IConfiguration, just like that. Notice we got the using statement at the top. If you would have had that turned off, you would not see that right now. And we're going to call this configuration, sorry, lowercase c. And this is going to get set to a new configuration builder. The next thing we need to do, I'm just going to tab this over, is .NET has the ability to extend its classes that we have out there. So there is an extension that is in the Microsoft Extensions hosting. It's called setBasePath. And we're going to put in here the app domain .current domain .base directory. And from that, we're going to add the JSON file, appsettings.json, and I'm reading up here now. The bool optional, it is not optional. If we don't find this, we're not continuing. And it is, the true is to tell it to load again if it is rebuilt, if it's changed. And then we're going to build. Yeah, this is going to tell you that there's a spelling error, but don't worry about it. So now we have a configuration, and it says unnecessary assignment. So I'm going to put down here at the bottom here a console.readline, and we're going to run this. Configuration file was not found. It is not optional. Okay, now why was it not found? The reason it was not found is because if you click on app settings and you hit F4 or you go to properties, copy to output directory. It's set to do not copy. You either make this in either always or if it's newer. It doesn't really matter. If you wanted to say newer, if it's a big file, that's fine. I usually just do copy always for all my JSON files. All right, now we can run it again. And make sure you have a breakpoint at the read line. And when we run this, we're going to stop here. And you can look at the configuration. It has 12 items in it. So here's the exclude. It's the very top thing, exclude. And you got exclude 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we have folder config settings, item 0. And then here's your name and here's your path. That's brought this out of the file and into memory. Now we need to be able to use it. We need to get our hands on it. So the next thing that we could do here is we need to get this out of the configuration. And the way that we do that is we need to create an iServiceProvider. So ServiceProvider is equal to new service collection. And again, this is going to be something that we're going to have extension methods. So we're going to add a singleton because we only want a single copy of this. And this is going to be of type IFolderConfig and FolderConfig. And what we're going to do at this point is we're actually going to say FolderConfig.load because we have over here the load and it needs to take into configuration. Don't worry about the P, it could be any letter. But so we're going to throw in here configuration and end. And then we're going to build that service provider. As you can see, there's an error here, and it's going to say cannot be used parameter implementation of generic type, add singleton, tservice, And the main reason is because here in the class, we did not put down that this inherits from IFolderConfig. Now, when you look at this, it'll work. So remember, you have to inherit from the interface. Now let's run this again. So we saw the configuration had 12 items in it. And now we can look at the service provider and it has 1. Because it's the only thing that we pulled out of the configuration. And this says the service type is IFolderConfig and everything looks pretty good here. All right. It's a singleton. And that's all you're going to see at the moment. Once the service collection is created and the service provider has been built, then we can instantiate any of the configuration objects and inject them into a class. So here we can take IFolderConfig and IFolderConfig is appropriate. And you can say service provider get required service, and what we're going to ask them for is the IFolderConfig, like that. Now when we run this, now you have an IFolderConfig, and what's in it? One config setting, and you have a data directory and exactly what you need. Now let's get this into a class. Now the way that we're going to do that is I'm going to create another project because I don't want anything in my launcher. I want this to be something that I can either use in a bigger application or something else. So this new project is going to also be a class library, and it's going to be named just like the other ones were. So like the other ones, we're going to name it with the same kind of extension, except this one's going to have configurations and DI, the name of the project, and I'm going to put the API on the end of it. So this is the driving project, and I'm just putting API because this is kind of like the back end. It's not the front end. And we're going to rename this class to the trusted worker class. Yes, we're going to say this. Now, if we come in here, we say public worker, and then we're going to put in our trusted public void execute, like that we always use. And this is where things are going to get a little different, because we're going to inject into this an IFolderConfig with an IFolderConfig as a variable here. And this IFolderConfig will be something that will be used everywhere. So we're going to put this up as a private member, like that. And right now you're seeing that we can't find this, okay? And the reason is because we need to add the project references for it. So we're going to need to add configuration. And then the same down here in the launcher, we're going to have to add the API that we're in right now. Otherwise, we won't be able to call it. So now when we come back here to folder config, it'll say use this configuration, and we have it. The next thing we need to do here is this dot IFolderConfig is equal to IFolderConfig. So down here in execute, if we needed to use IFolderConfig, we could. Right now we're saying make this field read only, which makes sense because we don't want to change it any place and the read-only will allow it to only be set in the configuration file, or if we set it up here defaultly. Let's go back to program, back in the launcher, and we can say worker is equal to new, and you can send in here IFolderConfig now, worker.execute, and we can run this. And let me put a breakpoint right here. We'll put one here in workers config. We'll execute. So now we have called in program. We're calling this constructor right here, and as you can see, we're bringing in the configuration settings, data directory. And we can step down through this, and then there's the breakpoint we set on execute, and then inside execute we still have it. It's still available for us to use. All right, now that is the rudimentary way of doing dependency injection. Now let's look at a way to do this using .NET's dependency injection, the built-in portion of it. And this is what is used for web services. Okay, so you can use this in your console applications too. I find it extremely beneficial because I don't need to put a read line here, and it's quite easy to do. The main thing that you have to do is you're going to have to put in a host application builder, and we're going to call that builder. And it's going to come off of host, create application builder, and it's going to take in some args. Usually it's the args. These args are the ones that are, if you remember, this is the main program, so you could put arguments in here if you wanted to. The second thing is, instead of doing this stuff here, we're going to come in and we're going to say builder.services, type, .add hosted service, and that's going to be the worker. So we're going to use the worker as our hosted service. We're going to take this singleton out of here, and we're going to bring it up to inside of the build services. So we're going to add the singleton to this service instead of to this service collection. The add service provider is going to take the builder services, and we're going to build that as a service provider, and this stuff here can just disappear like that. We can still create the IFolderConfig, but we will not need the worker execute or the read line anymore. This, we're going to put a using statement in here and say iHost host is equal to builder dot build, and then we can just say let's run it. So what is all this doing? The host application builder is just what it says. We're going to build an application that this launcher program is going to host. It's going to manage whether it comes in or out of memory inside of the application domain. We're going to add a singleton here for the folder config. Once we get all this stuff added to the builder services, we're going to create our service provider. From that service provider, we can get our IFolderConfig, which we can launch into memory, and then we can say, hey, let's build this thing and let it go. So we have this problem right here with the add hosted services. So we need to go back to worker, and worker could inherit from the interface iHosted service, but that's not going to benefit us because then we have to implement everything in iHosted service. Now, luckily enough, Microsoft has built this background service which inherits from iHosted service, as you can see right here. And all we need to do is add an abstract method called execute async. It's amazing that I've used execute for so many years, and now we have an execute async. So the one thing we need to do now to make this work better is we need to get an iHost application. We need to put in an iHost application lifetime with an iHost application lifetime. Make it like that so we know it's an iHost. And then up at the top, we need to put this in as a private read-only. And if you're having problems with this, if you typed it in, make sure the lettering is proper. I know that's bitten me a few times in the past. We'll put an equals here. And like that. Now, if we build this, 2 succeeded, 0 failed. We're going to put a break on the execute async. So let's run this. Come down, we entered the execute async, and we're going to throw an exception. So throwing the exception is not really going to help us, but if we get rid of this, we're not returning a code path, right? Not all code paths return. And that error can be easily solved by just putting in here async. Now we're going to put some other stuff in here. We want to put a try in here, and we're going to put in console.writeLine hello world, like that. I'm going to put a catch in case something blows up to say throw back to the main application. So back in program, we can delete this whole world, hello world, we don't need it. So let's hit F5, we're going to run it, and don't need to stop here. I don't want to stop here, we're just going to let it roll. We're going to get hello world, and this is still running. If I hit enter or whatever, we're still running. As you can see, the program is not ended. So this is what a service will look like if you just run a service. From like command prompt or whatever, this is what it will do. Say lifetime 0, press Control C to shut it down. Environment is production. So I hit Control C, and yeah, it shut down. Application is shutting down. So the Control C went in and said, hey, OS, shut this thing down. It made a call into my application, and it shut it down. Now, how can we make this thing shut down? Because I know that's a lot of people that get into this. They're like, oh, well, how do I shut this down? So the way you shut this down, that's why we have this little guy here, all right? The lifetime. That's the important thing. And that has this beautiful method called stop application. So now if we run this, boom, killed everything. And we're good to go. So let's go back to program. And we can now remove these lines of code from program.cs. Now, why can we do this? IFolderConfig is just being assigned to a service inside of iServiceProvider. iServiceProvider is building the service provider based on the builder services. Inside of builder services is where your singleton has been instantiated. So these are not really needed. These are just here to test, which just reduces the size of your program.cs file a lot more. Now, if you go back here to worker and we restart this, you will see that when it runs, IFolderConfig has everything that it needs. And so does the lifetime.
I hope you enjoyed the video. Please like and subscribe to the channel. Ring the bell to be alerted when the next video is coming out. It will be on dependency injection, and it will touch on serialization. I hope you now understand more about how the .NET Framework actually works with configuration files and using a hosted service. The next video is going to go even deeper into dependency injection. Please do not forget the link for this video's code is in the description. If there is a topic that you would like to know more about and see some examples in a video, please send me an email or drop a note in the comments below. You're always welcome back in the C# workshop, and as always, have a nice day.